I mean, we all got to get along, I guess, I mean, no matter what our differences are.
Hi everybody, my name is Gareth. Welcome back to my channel. The subject of today's video is the Wayfarer series written by Becky Chambers. So Becky Chambers started this series in 2014. That was when the first one was published, and it's kind of an interesting journey for her because it was a self-published first novel originally that was produced on a Kickstarter campaign, and it got picked up by a publisher, got really popular, and then it won a Hugo Award, and she's followed it up with 3 books that are just as successful, all based around the same galaxy, series of worlds that she's built, and different species built all around this universe that these 4 books are set in. So this first book that came out in 2014 was A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And I tell you what, just off the bat, the titles of these books are well good. So The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is actually quite telling about what the content of the book is, because I'll get into more detail in a minute, but it is literally about the journey to the planet more than what happens when they get there. So the plot is about them having to get there, but it's about the journey more than why they're doing it, sort of thing. So The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is the first one, and then the second one is A Closed and Common Orbit, which is a follow-up to the first one, but in many ways all of these aren't connected in a really direct way. So you could read them in different orders if you wanted to, but this is a follow-up to the first one. And then The Record of a Spaceborne Few is the third one, which is quite different to the other 3, I think, but very clearly part of the same universe. So that was the third one, and then the series ends with the book I've just finished, The Galaxy and the Ground Within. So I was dying to read this. Now I finally got around to it. I'm so pleased I have, because I think it's one of the best ones out of the 4 of them. So those are the 4 books, and I will just start off by saying that the fact that they're not directly connected, but they are connected, so it's like part of the same universe, but you can read them separately, is quite reminiscent of what Ursula K. Le Guin did with her Heinous Cycle books. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because I think these books and Becky Chambers' style and Becky Chambers' approach is very much like a descendant of Ursula K. Le Guin. I think you can see the influence hugely there. If you're an Ursula K. Le Guin fan, you will probably like these books. I think the tone of the books are really similar. And just the pacing, the level of action is similar, and some of the themes and concerns and the things that are explored are very similar as well. But Becky Chambers is obviously more modern, so some of the emphasis is different. But definitely I can see that Ursula K. Le Guin thing. And while I'm talking about tone and style, I'll say also that because of the pace and because of the fact that it's so serious and explores these quite serious themes, and it's got that sort of soft political thing going on, so not political as in party political thing where it's just like lots of factions fighting, but more important sort of political themes as in philosophical themes and themes about identity and things like that. Because of that, I think if you imagine the pace and style of Silent Running, the film Silent Running, which is a classic, but you can kind of imagine that, those sort of 70s science fiction films, and then the philosophical elements in Star Trek. Specifically, I'm thinking Star Trek Next Generation and DS9. Those kind of, like the religious episodes of DS9 and some of the episodes in Next Generation, like The Inner Light and Who Watches the Watchers and stuff like that. Those kind of, and actually there's things like the episode of Next Generation about the symbiont, I can't remember what it's called, Measure of a Man. you know, it's the classic elements of Next Generation. I think there's a lot of things that are similar to Becky Chambers' writing and that kind of thing. So I think she's very clearly a Star Trek fan, and I think you could set them in the Star Trek universe if you wanted to. But she's created very vividly and cleverly created a very full universe for these 4 books. But just off the bat, if you like those kinds of things in science fiction, then you'll probably like these books. Science fiction is all about exploring the what ifs, isn't it? It's like how technology might change, how we might change as people, how culture changes, you know, how interaction with other species and other aliens can be reflected in science fiction to discuss how we behave and how we might have to change our culture and things like that when we have an other to deal with, and how our belief system have to change, our sense of tradition changes, our sense of our own self and our own identity changes through time as we learn what it's like to be like someone else. And that's a huge part of these books. So that idea of learning about someone else's culture and therefore changing your own perception of all of life and how the universe works and where you fit in and where these other aliens fit in is what she's getting at, I think, in these books. So quite a unique voice, I think, because science fiction is full of the exploration of these themes, and like I've said, she's not the only person to have been influenced by Ursula K. Le Guin, but a lot of authors will try to somehow squeeze those themes in while they're putting an emphasis on plot, conflict, scale, the things that are that they would consider to be a driving force in a book, rather than what Becky Chambers does, which is make the character exploration, the philosophical exploration, the drive of the book. So this has divided some science fiction readers, because I've seen people say they hate this series, and more often than not, I've seen people say how much they love the series. And I do absolutely love the series, so I think the 3rd book is the weakest, but really that's because the other 3, I think, are bigger themes, and there's more of an alien feel to them, because the 3rd book literally just explores how humans might be cohabiting and living in this universe. So it's a great addition to the series, but I think it's not quite as revelationary as far as what she's trying to do. But people have criticised the lack of action, really, because you can't even say it's a lack of scale, because the scale of it's huge and the themes are huge. I think it's that idea of pacing, I guess, if it's about action. I mean, I do think, though, that the pacing is there because of the way the characters interact. So what you get is that idea of the page turning aspect of it, the fact you can't put it down and you want to keep turning the page, is based around how compelling the characterization is, and how the things that happen in the books change the character's perspective and change your perspective of everything, and you can't wait to see how these aliens are going to react and how it's going to move the plot on. So it's not really because they're in peril necessarily. That was the word I was looking for when I was doing that big list of what other people like the focus to be. But peril is there. Peril is definitely certainly in the first 2 books especially, there's a lot of peril, but the peril is not the focus. So it's there, but it's there in the background, and in the foreground is more of the philosophical stuff and what keeps you wanting to keep reading it, and you really do get drawn in and you get sort of immersed in this really deep character exploration. That's what immerses you. It's not this idea that one of them could die any minute. So I think that's what makes it unique, and I think that's what makes it, or at least unusual. I don't know anyone that writes like this. So if anyone has got any other comparisons, then the closest thing I've got in my head is Ursula K. Le Guin, but I think even with her, it's not as rich as the as this in how far Becky Chambers wanted to define these very alien aliens. With Ursula K. Le Guin, a lot of exploration of the philosophical ideas are built around like political systems and belief systems, and not necessarily the strange biological makeup of these aliens, which do have a huge effect on how they interact with each other and how they distrust each other sometimes as well. So Becky Chambers has made a huge effort in creating this quite very vivid but very unusual cast of characters. These are aliens that are very, very alien. So I'm a huge fan of Farscape, as you've seen in other videos possibly, and right back to Star Wars, I was a huge fan of the way they create aliens in Star Wars, and I think she's made that attempt to make these aliens very alien, and that just hugely helps what she's doing, because it bounces off into other things, other issues that these aliens have to deal with to cohabitate. So just bouncing off that idea of these different aliens that make the book really emphasise that science fiction element of setting up these differences in the races that create new tensions and demands on how they can live together, and creates that sort of voyage of discovery, if you like, for these characters that don't know each other very well. So you've got the Andrisks, and they're reptilian with feathers, and one of the, well, there's very many things about these races that I won't mention necessarily because I need to talk about it relatively quickly, but these Andrisks, they have a family system where the family unit are made up of adults that are polyamorous adults that decide to, if you like, foster these children that aren't part of their biological makeup. So they're not biologically connected, but they raise these children. And that's just a standard thing in their society. So that's one of the things that comes up and gets discussed and debated and, you know, that sort of stuff in the books. So they're the Andrisks. There's the Aluans, who are big features in the 4th book, and they do appear in the 1st book as well. And they got like these silver scales. And their language is completely based around these colours changing in their cheeks. And they don't have a spoken language in the same way that a lot of the other races do, a lot of the other species do. So that creates an interesting sort of tension for them. And again, Becky Chambers is exploring language there, and that can be quite an interesting thing that happens there. The Cyanots are the symbiotic species in the 1st book, and I think they mentioned in one of the other books as well. And Becky Chambers uses this species and another species as well to explore the sort of pronoun thing. So clearly that's a very interesting and kind of hot topic at the minute. And Becky Chambers uses this idea that the symbiont is as two creatures that are living together and becoming one person. So once they are a symbiont, they're referred to as they refer to themselves as we, and everyone else regards them as plural, so they say they as well. And obviously there's shades of the pronoun they and them that's becoming more common for us now. And there's another species. Which ones are they? I think they're the I can't remember which species it is, but there's another species that they are genderless while through their childhood, and then at one age, when they come of age, they decide what their gender is. So again, like Ursula K. Le Guin, Becky Chambers exploring gender for that species as well. The Grum is a species that only appears in the 1st book, I think, but it's quite a big character, and that's the Dr. Chef character. Really good character actually in the 1st book, and almost driven to extinction because of war, and they've got 6 limbs, and they travel. Again, another gender thing. They go from male to female and then go to one of those two genders through their life. So they change their gender through their life. So, and again, another exploration of another system with a different species that has another alternative gender system. And then the Quailing are featured quite a lot in the fourth book, and they're mentioned in one of the other books. I think that's the first one. And they're like insectoid. They're kind of like lobsters, and there's a reference at some point to lobster, sort of like lobster centaur cross. And they are very isolationist and distrustful of other species. They've got much more of a history of being warlike, and they're xenophobic and that kind of stuff. And they've got to kind of keep their distance to other aliens. So again, that creates tension. And that's the real point, really, that the tension in the book, there are these events that create peril, but it's not really where the tension lies in the books. The books lie in the tension between the characters that are interacting. They either have to help each other out, or they're kind of exacerbating the situation that they're in and making things worse because of distrust or their own traditions or what they're used to or their own instincts and that kind of stuff. So, having said that, I'll quickly summarise each individual book. So, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is the first one. So, like I said, it came out in 2014. It's a huge success. And I think this is the book that, you know, you could just read this one and you get a lot of what you get from the other books out of it. Although I do love the whole series, so I'm not suggesting you don't read the others, but this has got a lot of what Becky Chambers is trying to do in this one book. And that is setting up all of these races. So I think most of the races, if not all of the races that are in those 4 books, are mentioned at some point in this book, either in great detail or in more of a passing thing. And it's like, you know, this journey they make to this planet that will be like the setting for them doing what they need to do in this area to create this tunnel. When they get there, it's kind of like the end of the book. But the journey there, they encounter different species. One of them goes home and visits family, and that creates more discovery and sort of interaction and issues for the crew and those kind of things. And it's all about that journey. So that's why it's a strange title, but when you read it, you know exactly why it's called that, and it makes perfect sense because it is about the journey. And yeah, it's a really interesting book. So the character that is like your POV character is called Rosemary, and she's human. She's from a Mars colony, and there's not a lot of humans in these 4 books, by the way. But in this first book, Rosemary features quite heavily, and she's discovering all these other aliens, and like as what you're discovering through her eyes as she joins his crew and then goes on these adventures with him, and that's quite cool because they are sort of messing around with her and her expectations, things like that as well. So there are some little bits of humour in there. I'd say that the overall tone of the books is quite serious though, so don't expect to be laughing your head off reading these. But you do get really involved in the characters, and it's quite an emotional read through the whole thing if you're enjoying it. I mean, clearly, I'm kind of acknowledging the fact that some people don't like these, but if you're part of this, what seems to be the majority that do read it, you will get sort of like an emotional response from it. So that's the first book, where Rosemary is on this ship, which is called the Wayfarer, which I think is called which is why it's called the Wayfarer series. And they're on the ship, and the job of this ship is to create wormholes, create these holes in space to create better kind of shortcuts for different species, different worlds to communicate to each other. And there's I think it's the aliens that are trying to become part of this huge kind of intergalactic United Nations, because they're called the Galactic Commons. And the Galactic Commons are running through the whole thing. So there's this awareness of this huge organisation that sort of binds everybody together. So that's what this is about. They're trying to allow this other alien species that are warlike and are kind of a bit problematic to join the Galactic Commons in this book. So that's the first book. The second book A Closed and Common Orbit. This is my favourite one out of the 4. And it's got a different intention than the first one. The first one is definitely introduction, and it's talking about many, many different species and sets up loads and loads of things that you can see she was probably thinking, I'm going to keep going with the series, but if I put loads of overall world building in there, then it'll kind of help the series along. Whereas this focuses more on 2 characters. So you've got Sidra, who's an AI who is learning to adjust to being humanoid when Sidra was used to being part of a ship, so like an AI on a ship. And it's so interesting, it's so brilliant the way that Becky Chambers uses this new situation for Sidra to explore what it must be like if you are an AI that's used to seeing everything and having the advantage of being across the whole ship, and then you only have your 2 eyes to be able to see through, and how limiting that can be, and how this huge adjustment has to be made by this more robotic kind of humanoid robot setup, rather than where this AI was originally formed, which was as part of a ship. So Sidra's story in this is fascinating, and it's just brilliantly explored. I loved all that. And her story and what happens to her is combined with Pepper's story, and Pepper is a chosen name for somebody that originally was called Jane 43. I think it's Jane 43. Hold on, something like that. And basically, Jane was created as part of a genetically modified birthing process to create a worker slave kind of thing. And when she's a child, she escapes and she has to get used to freedom. And she's getting used to freedom with Sidra getting used to being humanoid. And both of them are kind of helping each other on this journey. And they interact with different people, and they are kind of on the run, and they're trying to better their situation with travel and transport and equipment and those kind of things, while you're getting these flashbacks about how these characters got to where they were. And it's so good. I thought the pacing was different in this one. I think possibly because there's only 2 characters, and just the general plot is different, because The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is deliberately saying that the journey was long and slow, and I think that's part of the style of it deliberately. This is a bit faster, so if you did read the first one and you thought that you would have preferred a faster pace, this is faster paced. But yes, brilliant. I love the interaction between Pepper and Sidra, and the revelations about what happened to them is fantastic and really, really emotional. There's some real heartrending bits in it. So yeah, I absolutely love that book. So that's the second one. The third one, I'm not going to talk about this as long, I don't think, because I was a little bit disappointed with this one. So out of the 4, I found this the hardest to get through. It's not particularly long, but I read this slower because I wasn't as pulled in. This is just about humans. So I think they do meet other species in it, but the centre of the book, the focus of the book, is on these humans that are on this ship that they're called Exodants, and they're people that have chosen to live their lives on a ship and not settle down onto a colony. And it kind of explores what that really means, what it's like to raise a family on a ship. And then I distinctly remember there's some bits where one of the children's being bullied at school and that kind of stuff. So it's more domestic in its content, I think, in this one. So that it totally works as a companion to the other books. And I don't think you should skip it, but I think it's not quite as good as the others. It's not quite as exciting, I don't think. And I think it could be because the focus, just by definition, is a little bit more familiar and therefore a little bit more ordinary, I guess. But it's got some stuff in there that sort of builds on the other books and also helps out with the 4th book as well. So, don't skip it, but definitely for out the 4, I think because it's centered on humans, it's just that little bit more familiar and slightly less immersive, I think. And then we've got this one. So I think this is almost as good as the second one. I thought it was really, really good, and it was really nice to get back into this world as well. So, because it had been quite a while since I read the third one, I'd forgotten how nice it was reading it. So, what the actual experience of reading her writing was really cool. I did read the novella, To Be Taught If Fortunate, in between as well. So it wasn't like I hadn't read something by her for a while. But the Wayfarer series is very specific in its tone, I think. So it was really good to read it again. And this is full of aliens, and it's not got any humans in it. There's a human that's been referenced a lot, because one of the characters is looking forward to seeing that human again, but it's not actually in it. And it's really about these 5 or 6 maybe aliens that are trapped on a planet, like in a kind of a sort of a cafe that's built around, that's built to house people that are between places. So it's like I think they call it a 5-stop cafe or something, and they're stuck there because of an electrical storm and things that are just meaning they can't go off, and that creates tension and creates issues for the people that need to get going, and it means that they discover more about themselves and about other aliens. And there's a really shocking bit towards the third act of the book, which I think I swore when I read it because I was so shocked, and it was kind of upsetting. And then that kind of brings you into the last bit of the book, and it makes the characters act differently to how they had before, because everything changes once this thing happens. I don't want to spoil it, but you get so immersed in the characters that it's so shocking when this thing happens. Someone gets hurt, and when someone gets hurt, you're like, whoa, hold on a minute, and it's quite involving, and it's interesting how much you're affected by that, because you are invested in them. They do feel so real, and they feel so real because of how she writes. So I do think that, as I was trying to say in the first part of this video, it's genuinely exploring the best kind of themes you get in science fiction. So it's a really good example of science fiction, but for so much of the focus of the book being about character, it's fantastic because you're so immersed and it matters so much, and you do get to know these characters. I'm definitely going to read them again, and I'm looking forward to kind of being reminded of what these characters say and how they learn about each other and learn about themselves through what happens to them in the books. And I think what makes them so rereadable is how real the dialogue is and how real the characters are. So, there we are. I think she's done something quite special there, and she's started another series about a robot and a monk and a robot. She's written 2 books in that series, and I haven't been able to get hold of those yet. But I think she's clearly an extremely good writer, and I think all 4 books have won awards, and there's something very, very special about these. So, yeah, you may be someone who needs like proper kind of violence and sort of fast-paced heroic action. There's not a lot of heroism in these either. The problems aren't ordinary problems, but they're certainly not sort of heroic problems that these characters have. And I just think that focus she's got is just lacking in lots of other stories, so it's kind of interesting. So that one's a bit more domestic, and I guess because these ones are less domestic, it's because they're more alien. So some of the issues in there are quite domestic, but they're alien domestic. So it's issues about how they parent and how they give birth as well, and what happens when they give birth, how they communicate, what their language is like, how they distrust another species who've been wiping out their species, and those kind of things. So some of the conflict in the dialogue reminds me a bit of some of the conflict you'd get within the dialogue of something like Babylon 5 as well. So you can see where she's coming from. You can see what some of those influences that she's had. But I think it's done in quite a unique voice, I think. So we're exploring, in these books, we're exploring the themes of a found family. She's making a real attempt to create a fully diverse cast of characters that are truly aliens, which I think is fantastic. These unfamiliar species with completely different ideas about how their relationship should work, how food should be eaten, and what sort of food they should have. Like I was saying, the parenting thing, like this idea of a found family is a consistent theme in all the books, that idea of a found family. How people are educated is discussed in there, so how different species are educated, their purpose and their traditions, and kind of around that you've got that sort of intergalactic politics as well, and there's a backdrop of an interspecies war as well that is not, you don't have battles in the books, but you've got that in the background that they are kind of dealing with it as well. So yeah, that's my take on these 4 books. Really special books. I can't just say guarantee that you're going to love it, because it seems to divide people a little bit. But if you've been intrigued by what I've said and you think it sounds interesting, then you probably will like it. I just think they're really special, and I do think that if you like Ursula K. Le Guin, you'll probably like these books. So, thanks a lot. Bye.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be you. You sit up on your high chair, on the outside looking through. I know